Support for the Civic Sci-TV network comes from listeners and viewers like you and organizations such as the Rita Allen Foundation, which invests in transformative ideas in their earliest stages to leverage their growth and promote breakthrough solutions to significant problems. Go to ritaallen.org to learn more.
Mapping the global landscape of civic science by dissecting new insights from researchers, practitioners, and leaders in academia, government, for-profit, and nonprofit organizations. This is Questions of the Day with Fanuel Muindi.
Previously on Questions of the Day.
Boundary spanning is what we do in civic science. We're connectors, right? We're spanning these boundaries that seem to have persisted, maybe I should say, between research and communities. And that's kind of the sweet spot where I've been working for over 20 years. And I was just remembering earlier today, a meeting that was probably close to 20 years ago where other people like me doing similar kinds of work, we were trying to figure out what to call ourselves. And I think back then all we could come up with was facilitator. And so I've never really had a good title until now that explains, it doesn't explain boundaries between what and what, right? But it does explain this idea that it's across a boundary. And that's what civic science is about.
In this segment, which we recorded back in May 2024, I talked to Niba Nirmal, who is a multimedia science communicator and founder of the YouTube channel NotesbyNiba, which we dig into next. Niba, welcome to the program.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's really exciting to be on here, and especially, known you for so long now. It's kind of surreal how much Civic Sci has grown, how much NotesbyNiba has grown. I'm excited to get into it today.
Yeah. And so in our program on the network, I try to map the landscape of civic science, and the terminology there, this is an umbrella term for initiatives in science communication, public engagement with science, community science, and really all these different approaches of engaging diverse publics out there. And so Niba, take us back a little bit to NotesbyNiba. What inspired to start this science communication initiative?
Yeah. So back in graduate school, I, like every other graduate student, was doing a lot of research, a lot of really great science. And I had been doing science communication without even realizing what it was for quite some time in my undergrad, and also as a grad student, just sort of talking about my science, sharing about it, taking it to open mic nights, that kind of thing. And in grad school, I realized one of the things I wanted to develop was this skill. I finally had a name for it and was I would love to be able to make content about this, because it was kind of the era of Instagram, the era of people sharing little bits and pieces of their life. This is before short videos were a thing, but it was really inspirational to be able to see these glimpses into other people's lives. And I realized the more I did it, the more I was wait a minute, I actually think I like talking about science more than I like doing it, because ultimately I just really like finding a fun topic and then nerding out about it for a while, whether that's velocity of cicada pea, or how fast plants can grow and how fast plants can spit out seeds or whatever. A lot of what we do in education in terms of curriculum and that kind of thing, these are things that are very, predefined areas of you have to learn X, Y, 1, 2, 3. And quite sometimes they're just not as fun as being able to learn about what's going on in the news, what's very relevant, what's the biochemistry of coffee. Why is it that certain plants have certain effects on human bodies? And orangutans recently have been filmed using plant medicine on wounds. That's wild. But meanwhile, you're stuck learning what is the life cycle of an angiosperm? And honestly, I think I might have fallen asleep during one of my biology lectures, because it was just so memorization based. And I never thought I would be into plants, but it was doing research, getting into a lab, seeing this hands-on stuff that made me realize wait a minute, plants are actually really cool. They're always out here doing the most. They're always a million different plants with a bajillion different adaptations. There's such a big variety of them, and yet we just sort of I don't know, our eyes kind of glaze over when we talk about it or look at them. And so I wanted to kind of take that excitement that I had learned for myself and bring that to other people. And I kind of wanted to also, again, have it be something very relevant, applicable, and what better way to do that than areas that plants are already being used. Yeah. So I realized, I wanted to kind of like bring these like stories and news of nature to people where people are right now. And right now that's very much short form video. That's like a big thing on digital platforms, but we have to remember that like the digital landscape is constantly shifting. And so you have to figure out like where your audience is and meet them there, especially when you're starting out. And then as time goes on, you can kind of, expect your audience to follow you where you go.
Yeah. And so who's actually your audience? That's a good, let's follow up on that. Well, who's your audience?
Yeah, great question. So I would say my audience are people who are, it's generally like a female leaning audience who are interested in like cosmetics, skincare, because a lot of what I work on is on nature and kind of how we can use different natural products, the efficacy of them, when it's valuable to have natural versus synthetic, that kind of thing. And so these are people who have a prior interest in nature, a prior interest in beauty and esthetician things, like all sorts of just sort of like general vibes, because lifestyle is a very huge market on the digital, sphere. And so by tapping into that, but then also being like, hey, by the way, did you know that like jojoba oil can be used for all these other things? You can meet them where they are, give them something interesting. And if it's packaged right, they'll follow you along with the rest of the science too.
Yeah. And so recently, in fact, I was looking at your current videos, right? You have one, space food used to be gross, and another where you say supercharged plant growth by electrifying the soil. How do you go about content creation? Can you just walk us through your process and deciding what topics to share with your audience?
Oh gosh, yeah, absolutely. This is something that took me a lot of like repetition and a lot of iterating of concepts and ideas, because I always kind of start out with, what do I want to make content about? What am I passionate about? Because if you're not interested in your topic, it's going to be pretty hard to get someone else interested in your topic too. And so the space food thing started because I was really curious about, just like fresh food on the space station. There's very little of it to begin with. What are they mostly eating the rest of the time? And so it started off as a project about fresh food and how like I would imagine that people would start like craving fresh food on the internet, on the space station. But then it evolved into being more about like the history. And I found all these weird facts about like the first dude in space had like a tube of pureed meat paste. And then for dessert, he had like a tube of chocolate, and both of them had to be in like toothpaste form because, gravity and that kind of thing. So I would say the number one thing for content is always start with what you are passionate about. And then the number two thing is figure out how to package it, how to make it something that people would want to see. And this is something I'm still very much iterating on. The nice thing about like YouTube in particular is that you can change the title and thumbnail. And now it's become quite common for people to test out 2 different thumbnails, to test out 2 different titles. And so that's what I've been trying out to see how it works. One thing I very recently learned and has completely shifted my like workflow has been the fact that like in academia, I was very trained to be like, here's a title that describes everything this paper is about and every single detail. And you can get that all from the title. Like this is exactly what it will be. But in content, what I've learned actually is that what you want to have is a title that describes like something very interesting or the first bit of your video, but not the entire thing. So it's a sort of exaggeration, a deepening of one little part of it. But then by the time the person comes and sees the video, they stay for the rest. And that felt very like unintuitive to me. Like I would have people give me these suggestions and I was like, I don't know, but then it doesn't like include this other part. No, you got to make it something that people are interested in watching. And the sad thing about YouTube thumbnails is like, ultimately they're not pretty. Like the thumbnails that get the most clicks are just flat out ugly. They go against all design principles. It's sort of like fast food. Fast food like defies all design principles, but we like it because it's bright and catchy and colorful. And so I'm trying to kind of meet it midway by like having my desire for something that is really like pretty and aesthetic and something I'm proud of. and also something that is really, really clickable. I have this sort of running document where I just dump all my ideas, any sort of like interesting headline, any sort of like, I don't know, concept that I'm interested in exploring further. And it's literally just one giant Notion page that's maybe like, I don't know, like 12 pages deep at this point. And when it comes time to pick a topic, I'll go there first and just sort of scroll through. Or I will go to the news and see like what is something people are talking about, because the turnaround time for my videos is about like 9 days or so now. It used to be 40, and that was very much not sustainable. And so I think having some place where you dump all of your ideas is really, really helpful, because you never want to tell yourself like only during this time I will think about an idea. No, because that's something that's always going on in the background. You might be at an interesting show, you might have a cool conversation, and you want to kind of throw all those ideas in one spot and meet them and flesh them out when you're in the right headspace for that.
Yeah. I'm curious, when you're doing this work, what is it that you hope that your audience does, right? Is there a specific action you're seeking them to do or response from them? Walk us through your definition, essentially, of what success means to you.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I will say it's something that's constantly evolving, you know, at different stages, there's different like actions that you want to drive people towards. It might be as simple as just liking your video. It might be like getting them to go externally and click a specific link. It might be having them comment and share with you their experience. I would say right now I'm in the stage of getting people to engage with me. So a lot of like, tell me what you think in the comments, a lot of like, what were your experiences like during XYZ? And it needs to come from a genuine place of like, I'm curious what everyone's, you know, first experience with plant biology was like. I'm curious about what are people struggling with their skincare routine. I'm curious, like, what is the thing that's stopping you from doing your skincare routine? Because sometimes you just don't want to late at night. What can I do to fill this gap and give you like a quick, low energy skincare routine video, so that way it meets those needs. I think in the future, depending on how my channel grows, there will be various call to actions, whether that's like chatting with them specifically about like one plant topic, and maybe, you know, I have a little Ko-fi where people can kind of like do like one-time donations. I think driving that a little bit would be really helpful to allow me to have more time and energy to devote to this. So ultimately, it kind of really depends on like what phase of the business you're in. I think I made the mistake in the beginning of having the action be the same every single time. And as things have grown, I've learned to actually differentiate them depending on the content or the video that I'm making.
Yeah, so it depends, right, in that matter as well. Because part of I'm looking at the space food, you know, used to be gross video, for example, here. In creating that, right, was there something in mind that you were hoping that the audience would achieve? Because I want to dig it a little bit deeper. You mentioned that you're doing this actually because you want to engage with your audience, right? You yourself, you want to see what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and responding to this content. In this case, what was the driving function?
Yeah, so this actually was a test. So generally in content, if you have something that does really, really well, you kind of want to repeat it with a slight twist and see like, what was it that made this do really well? I had another video about the soil on the moon and how useful it would be for gardening and growing crops and that kind of thing. And that video performed like, people were just super into it. Like people just really liked talking about like growing plants on the moon for some reason. It got a lot of views, a lot of shares, huge spike. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. Like I thought this was a really cool topic too. What was it about this topic that people really liked? Was it space? Was it the moon? In all the fields of science, space definitely like has so much communications and just sort of like governmental push towards like understanding the value of it, that I think people intrinsically have this like interest in space that's not as present in other sectors of science. And so this video kind of started because I saw that, you know, I saw that spike and I was like, oh, that's awesome. I love that my audience is into this. I want to see what other intersections of like space, moon, gardening, and my interests are they into? So why don't I find something else in space and see how that does? And so I was kind of just poking around different things, and I came across this video of an astronaut like who threw some like tomatoes up in the air, and then they just kind of like float around, and then he went like this, and he like missed one and like hit his eyeball and veered off. I was like, oh, that's ridiculous. Weird. Oh yeah, eating in space. Like, you know, everything we eat comes from plants, whether that's something that ate plants or a plant itself. What is there here? So I dug a little deeper, found something I was interested in, and then tested, is my audience going to be into this as well? And it seems like this is a video that people are really enjoying, which is awesome. So now the question becomes, how can I take this like interest in space stuff and figure out, like, is there a way to like translate that to other things? Is it the physics of it that's really interesting? Because we know that on like a lot of science platforms, people are really into physics, really into math. A lot of science audiences tend to be predominantly male audiences, but I'm really glad that like my audience is huge majority female. It's like, I think like 70 or 80% female, which has been really awesome. And so I wonder if there's a way to kind of talk about like maybe the physics of plants, or maybe the physics that goes into cosmetic applications, the difference between cream, powder, gel products. You know, why is it that we apply these different products in different ways? Why is it that they each have different absorption rates and things like that? So those are all, you know, they're all like threads, right? You can see like, here's an idea, here's a thread, here's an idea, here's a thread. And so iterating off of something you know that works and trying to stay just 1 degree removed is really helpful for that.
Yeah. So let's go even deeper, right? So let's say the physics, right? You just mentioned, right? If you're following one of these threads, would you reach out to scientists to try to scope out, right, this segment? What's the workflow there? Or is it that you're doing your own research independently? And or would you want to engage folk, for example, right? So just tell us a little bit about that workflow there.
Yeah, totally. So every single video that I work on that has like a sort of like deep dive about one specific research paper or one type of science, I always reach out to the scientist. I have to admit that like thus far, no scientist has ever responded to my email. I'm still going to email them because I'm curious about getting someone on the channel. I think that'd be really cool. But so far, none of them have responded or like had any sort of interest, unfortunately. But what has been really helpful is seeing all these other science communicators on the internet and being able to tap into them for their expertise. So I'm working on a video about some bees and the plastic, literally like plastic that these bees make. And I was able to call on a friend, Entomology Abby, who has a specialty in bees, and to get her input on this before I started making the video, which was really, really helpful. I also have learned, you know, the really huge importance of just high throughput when it comes to content, especially in the beginning. To put this in context, I recently was like kind of looking at some statistics, and I realized for someone who's starting on, say, like TikTok, for instance, the TikTok algorithm in particular wants around 6 to 8 videos every single day for 3 months to start off. That is a huge quantity of videos. And for science, you know, that's a lot. But once you've kind of passed that original sort of like checkpoint of like meeting all these metrics and getting a huge amount of followers, the algorithm treats you very differently. And so then you can like slow down your content. And so my focus right now, especially because I'm in this sort of like stage where I'm just really trying to grow and not trying to focus on like, you know, producing the most perfectly like made and audio done and like color graded video. It's really just about like, how do I feed the algorithm as much as it wants? And how do I be able to do that quickly? There's a lot to be said for workflow. And especially like when you are sort of the founder, the host, the editor, the filmer, like whatever, all the many, many hats you're wearing, same as you, right? For this channel, when you're doing all of that, the first thing to figure out is how can you make this workflow go fast while hitting all of your bare minimums? And so one creator friend of mine once told me, like, figure out what is the fastest rate you can make a video. Don't worry about like fancy editing. Don't worry about colors. Don't worry about graphics. What is the like bare minimum amount of hours? Because at the time it was taking me around 55 hours to make a video. And now I have it down to about 15, which is still much, much more than a lot of YouTubers. And I'm still trying to figure out how do I cut back down even faster. Especially because, you know, a lot of these sort of digital platforms, they want things at a specific rate, because you're not just sort of, for me, I'm looking for that general audience. And so the general audience is looking at all sorts of stuff, whether that's like people making videos about what they eat every single day, people making videos about the pet ducks that they have, people making videos about their cats sleeping on live stream. These are all like very accessible things to make. It doesn't require any like pre-scripting and research and fact checking the way that like my videos would do. So for me, really that first step has been like fast. How do I get it fast?
Yeah. I think, thank you for these insights, because I think rarely do we even get to get a deep look in how the science community thinks about, right, all the challenges that are in front of you, right, on your table as you try to navigate this landscape. I want to go back to the earlier comment. You mentioned that you reached out to scientists, and very few of them, if actually none, have reached back out to you. I wonder if you can dig a little bit into that. How would it change if scientists were able to engage you on development of your content?
Yeah, absolutely. I can say, I think, I wonder if part of the reason is because I don't have sort of a brand recognizability in the wider sphere, because I've worked with some larger brands, namely like SciShow and PBS and Discovery. And when I reach out to scientists on behalf of them, there's a much higher response rate and a much more receptive sort of response. And so I think it might just be, the rate at which different people get media requests, their interest in those requests, and then also like how interested they are in that outlet in particular. I know that like when I've reached out to certain scientists on behalf of, say, like a larger media outlet, usually what we do is we look for scientists who have done this prior media work, who have some, prior like interview or maybe a podcast or that sort of thing, which I personally don't love that approach, because the downside means that like you're constantly hearing from the same voices in that sector over and over and over again. It's like how grants go to the people who've gotten the grants already kind of thing. But the pros of that approach are that, you have someone who's comfortable doing it, willing to do it, has some experience, has some training perhaps. And so all of those make it a lot more appealing. So I would really love to see scientists who are interested in being in media kind of almost like seeking out those opportunities, or at least putting themselves in positions where they state, hey, I'm interested in doing this. So when I say positions, I mean like there are certain websites that you can sign up for as a scientist to indicate that you're interested in being a media contact. You can sign up for things like The Social Scientist, which is really great for mentoring and scientists saying, if you have any questions about communications or that kind of thing, you can reach out to me specifically. Scientists who sign up for Skype a Scientist, where they're able to go into classrooms virtually and chat with the students there. So there's a lot of places that scientists can kind of mark themselves as available. And I've tapped into those resources a lot more successfully. When it comes down to like, oh, I want to talk to this specific scientist because of this specific research paper, that's when it becomes a little bit more challenging, because that scientist may not have wanted to talk to someone, or alternatively, they may have already talked to so many people that they don't want to continue furthering that paper.
I wonder how does funding play into this as part of your work, right? Trying to do this work.
Yeah, great question. A lot of it has just been like self-funded, because it really started off as something that I enjoy doing. And then the deeper I got into doing Notes by Niba, the more I was approached by places to do this sort of work for them. And so I've gotten really amazing opportunities out of it and gotten to meet like really incredible people out of it, you being one of them. Honestly, the SAI like resident collective, this was the very first place to ever give me funding for Notes by Niba. This was the first time someone said they believed in this project. And so this feels really like surreal and wholesome to be able to be back here again, but also to like know that like they were right. It has grown quite a bit. And I've noticed like the periods of time where I'm able to give it more of my attention, it grows a lot better. And one thing that's been really frustrating over the years is that I'm sort of torn between like making money in order to survive and then having enough time to grow this. If I had like, in an ideal world, if I had like a year's worth of runway and I could just quit all my jobs and just focus on this, I think that would be really, really helpful. I'm growing towards that, because the thing is like with digital creation, algorithms really want that consistency. They really want that like committed, like every single day posting. And you might think like, oh, 6 to 8 videos every day is a lot. Yeah, it is. That's why it's a full-time job. People really only see, you know, the highlight reels, the final product, especially in social media. And they don't think of all the like back-end stuff that goes into it. I've gotten a handful of grants and various like small items from science communication. I would say that has given me probably about a total of maybe 4 months in the 3.5 years I've been doing this. And so that's why a big chunk of what I say, and also for every other content creator says, is to make sure that you're passionate about what you're doing. Because if you don't enjoy it, then it's going to be a long time before it pays. And even once it pays, why would you want to do something that you don't enjoy? Like, it's hard enough doing work as it is. And if you're going to do a job that like you don't enjoy doing just for the money, you may as well do something that's a lot more lucrative than, you know, spending all this time like having a build up to the launch and then, you know, posting every single time and blah, blah, blah. It's really, really helpful to know what your priorities are. And so once you know what your like, you know, passion is, you can figure out if doing something creation wise is for you, or if doing something where you support other creators is really great for you. I've been really fortunate to have an editor the past few months, and she's been really, really awesome. And she also kind of had this phase of realizing like, I really love doing content creation, but the part I like the most is editing and the creative aspect of like finding cool sounds and effects and all this other stuff. And so working with her has been absolutely wonderful. I think in terms of like long-term funding, my hope is that this will continue to be, this will be an avenue of revenue in my life, just so I can like pay the bills, make rent, that kind of thing. I don't know if it'll be something that's like a full 100% of my income comes from this. But there are a couple of options. You can get sponsors from like, you know, various brands and things like that. You can get grant money if you are doing something that is like very heavily science only and not at all like risque or potentially like incorrect or something like that. And then you can also get a sort of like crowdfunding type of option where you have like a Patreon or you have like a Ko-Fi or that kind of thing. I only recently made my Ko-Fi and I'm debating making a Patreon. I think in my like ideal world, I would have a Patreon that's very active and excited. But that's also, it's hard to grow on there now because there's just so many Patreons and there's only so many places that people can subscribe to. And I've noticed there's a big trend of subscription fatigue, especially as like streaming services skyrocket and there's like a million places that need so many different memberships. And so Ko-Fi is nice because it's like a one-time membership thing. And I think long-term, I'm going to have to think about like, you know, grants versus sponsorships and ideally both, but it can be easier to get sponsorships than it is to get grants, especially once you reach like a certain size of viewers per video and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And so in thinking, man, I wish we could just keep talking, Niba. I think we're just scratching the surface here. There's much more we can talk about. In thinking about the future, what is your hope? You kind of gave us a little bit of a glimpse there, right? If I could do this full time, I would, right? Give us some more insight into that. What is your hope? And I ask this in terms of also thinking of the science communication landscape. You're on the trenches, you're on the ground doing this work. I'm curious if you can place your comments with respect to what you're hearing from other communicators as well, who are part of your community in doing this work.
Yeah, gosh, that's a good question because I had a whole series of goals and I've been really fortunate to have met a lot of them, honestly. And so this year I've decided like I'm trying to make sure that I don't have goals that are outside of my control. I think it can be really hard to set those kinds of goals for yourself. I used to have these goals of like, I'll hit this many followers by this time, and then I would inevitably be disappointed when it didn't happen. But, you know, I think I didn't realize how much of it was just outside of my control. Because like, yes, you can post every day, but sometimes algorithms just favor certain things. Short term for the rest of this year, I like NotesbyNiba has for once like become my priority for the year, which has been a really awesome, like fortunate position to be in. It's still not something I can devote full-time effort to, but it's at least like I don't know, maybe like 20, 30 hours of my week. And then I have another anywhere from, I want to say like anywhere from 30 to 50 hours with other places. So balancing all of that has been quite tricky, but like taking it one day at a time, like actually has been really, really helpful. So short term, just continuing to focus on it to grow. I'm going to sort of shift my strategy after having that strategy meeting I recently had, and just focus on like quantity, growth, trending topics, news, all while keeping it factual, all while keeping it relating to science. And then afterwards, we're going to have just a revisit, see where we're at, because ultimately I think creating is something I want to keep doing. And I want to make sure that it's something that I can continue to enjoy doing. I would rather have a hobby that I enjoy doing rather than force it so hard that it turns into something that I just dread, because you know, there's plenty of stuff that I already dread doing: laundry, dishes, taxes, whatever.
Well, we're gonna leave it there, Niba. We need to have you back soon enough. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Thank you guys so much for having me. If there's any other questions you guys have or things you want like more insight on, I'm happy to chat. Drop me a line on my Instagram, on my YouTube, at NotesbyNiba on all platforms.